On January 13, 2026, the U.S. Energy Information Administration slipped a simple sentence into its short-term energy outlook. U.S. electricity consumption is rising again, year after year. Then it backed that up with totals, about 4,198 billion kilowatt hours in 2025, forecast to climb to 4,256 in 2026, and 4,364 in 2027. For most of us, that sounds like, okay, so what? But the grid hears something else: pressure. Electricity is one of the only products we make and use at the exact same moment. If demand rises faster than new supply and new wires, the system gets tight, and tight systems get expensive and brittle. Grid planners are also talking about big, fast load growth, over 132 gigawatts of added peak demand in the next decade across North America, according to reliability assessments. That's the kind of shift that can force new power plants and new transmission lines onto a faster clock. So what's really pulling the needle? You've heard the usual suspects: electric vehicles, electric heating, hotter summers, maybe factories returning. Those are real trends, but they don't fully explain why forecasts have jumped so quickly, or why the growth is hitting specific places so hard. Because the biggest near-term driver isn't on the road, it's in the cloud. And the cloud, in real life, is a building full of computers that never sleep. For years, U.S. electricity demand felt boring. Efficiency got better, lights switched to LEDs, appliances did more with less. Even as our lives got more digital, total demand didn't explode the way many people expected. That boring period trained everyone's instincts. Utilities planned for slow growth. Regulators judged projects in a world where every new power line had to fight for a reason to exist. Then, quietly, the story changed. EIA now expects consecutive years of growth, something it says would be the first 4-year run like this since the mid-2000s. In its January 2026 outlook, EIA also points to where the growth is coming from: the commercial and industrial sectors, not a sudden surge in residential use. That detail matters because it narrows the suspect list. Households aren't suddenly doing something radically different. Businesses are. Let's start with the most visible suspect: electric vehicles. Charging a vehicle moves energy demand from petrol stations to the grid, and because many people plug in at home, charging often lands in the evening and overnight, right when the grid is already busy. Now add electric heating. In colder regions, switching to electric heat pumps can raise winter peaks. Reliability planners have warned that some areas could shift from summer peaking to winter peaking, or become dual peaking, because heating and charging pile on to the same cold hours. There's also a manufacturing comeback story. EIA forecasts industrial electricity sales rising about 1.6% in 2026 and 3.4% in 2027. That's a big deal because industrial load tends to be steady and large. All of that is real, but notice the pattern. Those drivers spread out over millions of customers. They grow as people buy new cars or renovate homes. That's big, but it's gradual. The demand spike we're talking about has another signature. It shows up as giant blocks of power, tens, sometimes hundreds of megawatts at once, often clustered in a few regions. That pattern points to a different kind of customer, and utilities themselves are saying it. In one national review of utility load forecasts, data centers were identified as the single largest driver of near-term growth, more than half of projected demand growth in those forecasts over the next 5 years. A data center is a physical facility packed with servers, storage, and networking gear. It's where your videos stream from and where online payments get approved. It needs electricity not only to compute, but also to cool equipment and keep it stable. What changed recently is the kind of computing being built. Traditional data centers already used a lot of power, but AI training and AI inference, running large models, can be even more energy intensive because it relies heavily on specialized chips and accelerated computing. In December 2024, the U.S. Department of Energy summarized new findings. U.S. data centers consumed about 176 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2023, roughly 4.4% of total U.S. electricity use. The same report estimated a range of about 325 to 580 terawatt-hours by 2028, enough to land somewhere between about 6.7% and 12% of U.S. electricity consumption. That range is wide on purpose. Forecasting is hard. Some projects get canceled, some get delayed. Utilities also see phantom load requests, developers reserving grid capacity before they know if a project will really be financed and built. One national review argues that the data center portion is likely overstated by roughly 25 gigawatts because not every proposal becomes a real building. Even with uncertainty, the direction stays the same. Data centers are still the biggest single new load story in the near term. Reliability experts are treating this as a new category of risk. NERC has warned that emerging large loads, including data centers used for AI and crypto, are connecting rapidly and can be challenging to forecast and plan for. In a separate NERC white paper, it notes that forecasts have data centers alone reaching as much as 12% of U.S. electricity use by 2028, up from 4.4% in 2023. And it's not only an American story. The International Energy Agency projects global data center electricity consumption could roughly double to around 945 terawatt-hours by 2030 in its base case. So yes, EVs matter, heating matters, factories matter. But in the near term, the real driver of the sudden spike is this: computing facilities scaling faster than the grid's normal planning cycle. Data center growth feels like a punch instead of a push for two reasons: speed and shape. Speed is obvious. A new neighborhood adds load house by house. A new data center can arrive as a single interconnection request that equals a small city. Sometimes it's not one building, it's a campus. Shape is trickier. Many large loads today are power electronic loads, meaning software and electronics control the electricity flow. NERC has noted these systems can change consumption rapidly, creating behaviors grid operators didn't see as often in older load types. Data centers also don't follow the same rhythm as households. Homes and offices have daily peaks. A data center aims for high utilization around the clock. It's a 24/7 customer, and that changes what peak even means in a region. And then there's the where. Data centers cluster where fiber connections, land, and power access line up. In the EIA's January 2026 outlook, commercial electricity sales growth is especially concentrated in the West-South Central region, and EIA links much of the growth to large computing facilities, including data centers. That clustering can get extreme. Pew Research Center, summarizing industry and research estimates, notes that in 2023, data centers used about 26% of Virginia's total electricity supply, and they took double-digit shares in several other states. When one sector starts approaching a quarter of a state's power, the grid stops being background infrastructure and becomes a daily argument about land, jobs, noise, and bills. In the Mid-Atlantic, the conversation has turned into a fight over time. PJM, one of the largest U.S. grid operators, has outlined plans to integrate large new loads while protecting reliability and affordability, including guardrails and curtailment options for big customers under certain conditions.
This isn't just a reliability story, it's a household story. Recent reporting has highlighted how infrastructure costs, poles, wires, substations, often land heavily on residential bills, while large facilities can connect at higher voltages and negotiate special rate structures. At the same time, electricity prices rise for many reasons: fuel costs, storms, upgrades for aging equipment, so data centers are not the only factor. The conflict is about how a new, fast-growing load interacts with a system that was already getting more expensive to maintain. When people hear more electricity, they picture power plants, but a modern grid is limited by three things at the same time: generation, transmission, and local delivery. NERC's large load analysis makes this point bluntly. Large loads can range from facilities of several megawatts to multi-gigawatt complexes that must be served by the transmission system and may require new transmission facilities or upgrades. Now layer on the changing resource mix. The EIA expects solar to provide the largest increase in U.S. power generation in the near term, with solar generating capacity forecast to rise by about 69 gigawatts across 2026 and 2027. That helps, but planners still have to cover the hours when solar output drops and demand stays high. So the real challenge isn't, can we make enough electricity someday? It's, can we deliver enough electricity to the right places at the right hours with a system that stays stable? And the grid doesn't need to fail nationwide to feel the pain. Reliability is often decided at the regional peak, those few hours when everyone needs power at the same time. NERC notes that rising peak demand forecasts are contributing to lower projected reserve margins in many areas, which is another way of saying the buffer is shrinking. One path is build, more generation, more transmission, more substations. The EIA's forecasts already assume a lot of new capacity, especially solar, but steel-in-the-ground projects take time. Another path is flexibility. Instead of treating data centers as a fixed load, grid operators are exploring ways for large users to reduce consumption during emergencies or to accept curtailment conditions as part of getting connected faster. A third path is efficiency and accountability. DOE's work shows data center electricity use depends heavily on technology choices and operations, and policymakers are debating how infrastructure costs should be allocated so rapid load growth doesn't automatically become higher bills for everyone else. If the real driver is data centers and AI, it changes how you read the headlines. It means the grid isn't only electrifying cars and homes, it's absorbing a new digital industrial layer that grows in giant chunks and runs day and night. It also means local reality beats national averages. The country can look fine on a spreadsheet, while one region gets squeezed because a cluster of massive new loads shows up faster than wires and generators can be built. Over the next few years, watch for three signals: utilities creating separate rate classes for data centers, grid operators tightening rules for when large loads can connect, and a burst of new construction for transformers, substations, and high-voltage lines. Those are the physical footprints of the real driver and the places where the AI era becomes visible. America's power demand is spiking again. The real driver isn't just more gadgets, it's the physical build-out of the cloud and especially AI, turning electricity into the fuel of the next economy.